Okay, so how do you want to do this?
You're taking the lead on this.
Okay, I'm taking the lead. All right.
For a while anyway.
Okay, I know you're going to jump in. So what I thought I would do is I would actually just ask each person, because actually each of the presentations, I think there's a lot of connective tissue, but I think that also, having spoken to each person, that there's a lot left unsaid. So I want to give each person a chance to just elaborate a little bit, and then I think the threads are going to pop out. We're all going to start seeing them. So first question, I'm going to just go in order, is for Sam. You've spoken about adab. And I think we're all kind of in our heads thinking, well, what the heck is adab? Right. I want to ask a question, I think we'll get to that, is how does one cultivate adab? Okay.
My short answer will be that by engaging with the mediums that produce aesthetics. My long answer will be too long, probably.
I was about to say, you can't go on for 3 hours like last night.
Yeah, but also it could be that, I mean, as I said, adab can turn into adabiyat or adab if you either engage with the knowledge of literature that is given to you as your heritage, or the rituals that were given to you, and then creatively engaging with them. There is consensus that that person is a student of adab.
Well, I think it will be helpful for you to, because you started, at the beginning of the session, and some people are coming in. It would be important to go back to the 5 or 6 words that predicate the word adab, and then I will remind you of something that you said also in relationship to how to have adab. Yeah.
Do you want to remind me or no?
First, I think it's important for everyone to hear the 5 or 6 words that actually the word adab refers to.
Right. So the Encyclopedia Iranica, you mean that one, that the official explanation. It's like behavior, good demeanor, ethics, aesthetics. It means politeness, education, manners, and in Urdu I know it means humanities. It could be expanded, or in adab, in Indian context would be the way to say salam, to say respect or greetings, right? So it's all of those concepts, I would say.
And then you just touched on an idea here, which is this idea of creative adab. What is the difference between formal adab and creative adab?
Very excellent question, I think, because of what actually basically made me interested in adab primarily was the work of, there is this documentary that was made by my friend Thomas Erdbrink, who lives in Iran. He's a Dutch journalist and he was writing for New York Times. And he made a season of On the Man in Tehran, Our Man in Tehran, explaining the Iranian culture to Dutch. And there he had one episode talking about Ta'aruf. Ta'aruf is that thing that everybody who visits Iran is shocked with. And I realized that that's not doing justice to the concept, because I think the fixated, normative, uncreative version of adab will be Ta'aruf. The creative negotiation, so as I said, I mentioned multiple times, it must be between 2 people and more, the negotiation. So you never know when the third party arrives if what you had established before will be useful now, or in the next 5 minutes, or in the next 5 years. So that's what makes adab different. You cannot use the baggage that you carry. If you are not able to engage with it and produce something new out of it, then that's not adab. That's Ta'aruf or...
Yeah, and Ta'aruf is the just because it's also in my language in Afghanistan, it's the it's almost like embellishment and a societal dictum of behavior in order to create a mask, an image of all of what adab is. And you know, so therefore, the opposite is to actually cultivate it creatively. But I think adab too has had its restrictions, which you discussed, and
Yes,
that you
yes.
were trying to detangle by looking at it through other forms of knowledge and codes of behavior, psychoanalysis, and of course what's been left over to us from another Christ, Mani.
Absolutely. And I would, if I may, I would add this because psychoanalysis is very much under attack from many different schools of thought. Not all psychoanalysis will be what I represented. There is one particular school of psychoanalysis, mainly led by Adam Phillips and Christopher Bolas and a few other people who are under influence of Dr. Masood Khan, who basically started claiming that psychoanalysis is neither a therapy nor a science. It's just a subgroup of ethics. And from there, I became so interested by the question of what would you do with yourself and therefore with others. That makes, and it caused a lot of, it stirred a lot of arguments because NHS in Britain was like, well, now how do we need to fund this? I mean, if this is not therapy. But they said, well, if you go through this psychoanalysis to make yourself, cultivate yourself to increase your poetic self, we think you are cured. So that should be telling.
Okay, and for those of you in your language or in your cultural background, there is no concept, there's no adab as a term, okay? Sam and I have gone through this extensively, and in Chinese, we talk about dao de, and you talk about li, and we talk about poetry, and we talk about many of the same parallel ideas, and the fact that this is something which is performed and it's learned, as opposed to something that emerges out of logic, such as a categorical imperative. So there are lots of very strong parallels between how we think about this in China and East Asia, and then how we're thinking about this in the Middle East and Persia and Kashmir. So with that, I wanted to talk to Burcha. I just wanted to talk about, you say, you claim openly, I'm a ceramicist, okay? And, you know, in the contemporary art world, we have this funny notion that actually, you know, all good contemporary art is conceptual, and, you know, it's not medium specific, and the artist should choose the medium that best articulates the idea, right? But I heard something really different from you today, and that is by following this particular work in this particular medium, it led you to really extremely rich and rough terrain. So could you just, well, you know, tell me what it's like to be in the contemporary art world, somebody who's committed to a method and a material, but how you've been able to use that.
Yeah, it's a long story actually, but I studied ceramics, and actually after finishing the BFA and MA, actually I also have a PhD on the field, and it was some sort of too long to be in that field, and actually being like in the environment, ceramic environment, in the fine arts, and I found it a little difficult to really find your own voice. And actually, I had this distance later on after leaving the university, which was like 2009. And when I had that distance, I really, at the time, I didn't want to do anything with ceramics at all, because it was, I mean, it's such a dominant material, not only the historical associations, aesthetics, but only the material itself is like very dominant. It really takes over your own time, all the energy you have in the body to, you know, being able to make something. And that's why it was such a tiring process for me. And it took time for me to really understand the material. And I don't think I actually understood well still. And in between times, I mean, with that distance, I think, I had the time to really think about my own relationship with the material. And I realized that I have to keep that certain distance with the material to really make my own ceramics. And then I moved from the ceramic world. Somehow I found myself in the art world of Istanbul, and I moved to Istanbul. And then actually I was more into my own journey, let's say, inner journey. And I was basically looking for the place that I can be content. And then actually I started to, and in Istanbul, when I first moved there, I felt there is something for me. But it was like beyond the material and art and everything. I was just really looking for somewhere that I can be comfortable with. And then, I mean, this is such a long story. Sorry if I'm like making it like too in detail. But yeah, then ceramics somehow came back to my own quest, let's say. And then I think, I mean, with that distance that I understood, that ultimately, when I was trying to understand the city itself, which is quite different than Ankara, and because you live in the history in that city, but Ankara is the capital of the republic. What you see is the Bauhaus architecture around you. It's the modernism of, like the Turkish modernism. And then when I was trying to understand the mentality of Istanbul and how the people shaped throughout the centuries, then the material came back.
So this is what I want to follow up on here, is that when I first saw your work, I saw you working with ceramics in ways that I'd never seen them before, used before. But what I find distinct about what you're doing right now is, as you said, the ceramics become a departure for a really deep research-based practice. And that's one of the things that I just really struck me as distinctive about what you're doing right now. Does that not resonate with you?
No.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk about that as this material, this medium, as a portal. You said it's brought you portal as a gateway. It's brought you so many places with this one project. Just wanted to ask you about that process.
I mean, yeah, it was, as I said, that it was really a journey. I didn't foresee all these connections. And yeah, there is this piece, but now I see it more like a research. And actually, I'm now working on a book about it. This was just a small portion of the documents and books I've been through. And yeah, I'm doing ceramics, but at the same time, there are other practices that I want to, and also some drawings about the issue, the mental maps and the maps to find out my own journey and to find maybe other sources to connect with. And, but yeah, sorry if I just lost your question already. But.
No, I mean that's what I was interested in teasing out a little bit. And one of the things I found interesting was that this material basically took you back in time, and it took you geographically all the way across Asia, and as you noticed, from Persia to China back to Turkey.
Yeah, definitely. And somehow I just got back to the material and found my own maybe sources that where I live. So yeah, and actually when I was preparing the work, I realized that it's kind of, there's this parallel narrative between this the conference of birds simmer, ultimately finding themselves as a, so I saw the similarity just recently. Actually, I didn't know that, but it's like searching for yourself and ultimately finding, I mean, coming back to the same point maybe, but in a different mood and different experiences, of course.
So Sam, can we add to literature and ritual perhaps ceramics?
Absolutely. Any material, right? Any medium, as I said, absolutely. And this is a fantastic example, I think, right?
Okay, Chongbin, we all noticed that you skipped over a set of slides, okay? And this was a set of slides about, I know, a workshop that you did in Kyoto. And one of the things which you really emphasized for me when you described this project to me was this is an active temple space. This is not like a museum space. This is actively used. And the space that you're using is used by a very famous teacher in Japan. So this is his teaching space, which is why you have access to it. So I thought it was really interesting. And then the garden actually is an integral part of what is taught, right? And so I thought it was fascinating that you activated the space in talking to the monk there, understanding the teaching space, and you conducted a workshop there. So all those beautiful drawings that you saw in white acrylic on paper were actually products of this workshop. Tell me about that workshop and
Well,
what happened.
Initial idea is actually, when I being asked to do a show in art space, and I said I was interested because I'm a painter too. So I supposedly do show paintings in the shibunkakus. And so I said my first impression, and I always drawn to that, and the garden, thousands of gardens in Kyoto, and the way how they relate to and connect to the natures. And so I know it's somewhat very, in a ways, some ways very different in Chinese gardens, traditional gardens. And the working in a light space practice, which is primary idea is from phenomenological idea. And, grew up in California. And you see where the Irwins and all these Husserl's ideas. And I kind of want to shift in a certain way that there's two reasons. One is my observation in the gardens, where they see the season change. You have to see the whole cycle of the season change. Why I mentioned it geometrically, like Chinese feng shui, how they set to that. And the way they use different elements as the entities, they are more communicative. They are really companionship. So everything's connected, related. So it began to me is more obvious that the cause of the climate change and those kind of the trace of the violence in turning into certain kind of a form to me. So I began to photograph of that and through the time. And so then this Anthropocene workshop, which is they conduct a workshop annually, once a year in Germany, and this year's in Kyoto. I worked with one of the professors who was a food specialist, but he was especially in Japanese baskets. And so he gave actual lectures, he's on PhDs in baskets and in Berkeley. So he was talking about how the native peoples, how they understand in the 16th centuries near California coast, understand how to pluck the plants in a way, use which layers, and to be able to sustainable for the next years coming back. And use the basket was for everything, rituals, livelihood and everything. So, in a way, think about the material. It really, back to the light space works, not to me is only the phenomenological questions, but also in some way relate to the ontologies, some way relate to how material functions and how relate to each other's and to us in a way. So that's why I sort of, when these anthropocenists, including the Japanese philosophies, the biologists and earth scientists, so I used my photo, it was 20 members, and I used a 10 image choose the way how the branch cast the shadow, react to the light, almost like a nerve structures growing on the moss, and how casted on the rocks. And then there is also other images where the roots exposed to the photosynthesis and the sunlight, and the roots coming up to the ground, growing the entire pattern covers. So I used that, and then I made a template, and then get all the architectural tracing paper. So I have them take an acrylic and a brush, and study using their own interpretation from their professions, the way how they think what's the essence, what's their sensories towards this kind of, the appearance. And so that's all drawings. Some are really focused on the growing chemical reaction patterns. And so they're not necessarily into the shape, but they're more into the action and activities of this nature, plants grows. And then, so to me, it's kind of a beautiful drawings. It sort of mediates between the actual cause and also your perceptions.
So all of these images were actually from the garden that they had just walked through
Right.
the experience. They'd spent like a couple hours in the garden or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I just wanted to point out, these are all people who are presenting papers at a conference. So they're presenting professional content. That's all part of a discourse. That's all this sort of like expository language, this way of using language and logic. And the experience was completely aesthetic.
It's
Chong Bin had
actually
designed
really
for them.
brought them together because they always have this argument, and then it gets very intense, heated with the debate. But once they get into the drawing, and they were so calm and they were so happy, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so from here I wanted to jump to ST and the work of Arakawa and Nils. And, you know, one of the things that the questions that I had after the film was, okay, amazing ideas, okay, very suggestive, like the spaces that we saw. But the proof was there in those residents, okay? And there was something coming out of those residents, their faces, their energy, their body language that was very special. And I was wondering, you've been in the spaces, is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And have you met some of these residents, or have you seen more footage of them and how they describe their experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very unique group of people who decide to live in there. I mean, I think, you know, in the same way that Arakawa and Madeline again say, you know, we have decided not to die, these people are choosing, you know, this decision to not to die. And, you know, what does that mean? And I think when Arakawa and Madeline Gins talk about this, you know, architecture of vitality and like, you know, renewing this sense of curiosity and childlikeness, I think that really resonates in the people who are living there. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I can reflect on is I know that when I'm in, for instance, a space that Chong Bin has architected, your experience is so unnormal, non-normal, right? That you feel free, just open and free. And one of the quotes I love is that resident saying, "When I go out into the ordinary world, everything seems so flat and so plain." I'm paraphrasing, so flat and so plain. And when I come back to my Arakawa design space, you know, I feel so much more alive. And to me, that's just an amazing notion of how embodied experience shapes who we are.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole, I think it's important to stress that Arakawa and Gin's thought of death as sort of a process in which we are constantly fighting against. And so I think, yeah, in some ways it's a practice of how not to die, or in other words, the perpetuation of life. And so, you know, we talk about art practice. I think in some ways the inhabitants are practicing, you know, this maybe an expanded understanding of art, but then life, and constantly challenging their own bodies in this space on a daily basis. It's interesting to also see like how children go in there. And, you know, children, you know, are full of curiosity, they're open, they're not afraid to run through the terrain, whereas like adults maybe are much more cautious going through the spaces because they're, you know, over time maybe they've seen accidents or whatnot. But then I think what's nice is the work tries to break some of these preconceptions that adults may have accumulated over time.
So,
Yeah,
creativity over formality?
perhaps.
Okay, and so, Aramayani.
Arahmayani.
Aramayani. we've had a brief chance to talk, and I know one thing that people maybe don't know is about your work in Tibet. Could you just briefly describe some of the projects that you're working on in Tibet right now?
Yes, I started working in Kham area of Tibet in 2010 after hit by huge earthquake. More than 10,000 people died. Yeah, actually it's an area where foreigner cannot go. But somehow I managed to get a kind of permit to work up there with Tibetan monks and then also lay people with a kind of condition that I was not allowed to get any help and support from outside. So it's only me coming there and then do some work there with the people. And fortunately, my Tibetan friends, especially the lamas in the monastic group, they would really welcome me very much. And so then it makes things easy to work, although we don't really have money. But when people are really open and really willing to do things, so we can do it. So in the first 5 years, we managed to do some projects, managing the garbage, recycle, and then planting trees, and then reviving organic farming, and reviving nomadic culture and lifestyle, and then managing the water, which is the most important aspect of this plateau. Why? Because maybe some of you already know, and this is also one of the reasons why I go work up there for last 9 years. It's because its significance of the plateau is one is known as third pole. This is one of the largest ice fields on Earth. And then the second important aspect is also known as the Asia Water Tower. Almost 3 billion Asians living from the water coming from plateau through like 7 largest rivers, Yangtze, Mekong, Yellow River, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Salween.
Now, I know you've been asked, are you an artist or are you an activist? I'm not going to ask you that question. I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to ask you, what about being an artist, or what about art?
All right.
Allows you to do what you do?
Well, since my early sort of career, if I may call it career, actually I don't really care. Actually, I have a kind of way of looking at my practice that I see art and life is not separated. So for me, definition of my art is actually really blur with life itself. And then when some people asking, or maybe art critics, or people who like to appreciate art, and they say, is it art? Huh? And I said, I think so. Oh, I don't think so. It's okay. It's not my problem. It's your problem.
I would say what makes Joseph Boy's planting of trees in documenta art, and what's the difference with your planting 1 million trees in Tibet, where the source of life, you just said, for all these rivers starts. So it's a very silly question, but it is a question that again comes from categorical positioning of the field. And I feel that part of this discussion, we have to take it back to this reality that for thousands of years, art was not discussed separately from life. Philosophy was art, and art was philosophy, and astronomy was art, and philosophy, and geography was art, and medicine and mathematics, all these disciplines were quite integrated and fed each other, and patrons and collections, and why we have these incredible collections in the world of powerful patronage around the world comes from the wisdom of those, the stupidity, but also the wisdom of those who were smart enough to say, I'm stupid, so I'm gonna like rule everything by collecting as many advisors from all these fields. And that was also awesome, and I wanted to bring in the role of the collector, the smart, stupid collector that managed to not categorize art in the way that we do in contemporary world, and that we could actually look to that past. And that is why the conversation that you started with, and the example of Burchak was very important. And the Arakawa, I mean, just moving from the individual always and going outward towards a cosmos is the only way that we can think and connect. I mean, it's just the natural way of looking at where art goes. If it's just about you, I don't know. And I think that's what's so great about Arakawa's and Madeline's dream was, it's not necessarily about like making this thing literally happen, but why not? Like, what if their initiative really was taken on? I mean, he was talking about it being a science. You know, he wasn't talking about it as like some conceptual, you know, dream of an artist that's just playing with words. And he was saying, this is a science, this is an organism. You can change your organism by changing the atmosphere, and then that's gonna change. And so I feel that part of this whole discussion is that sometimes we forget the power of what we can do if we set aside all the different definitions we have around what dictates art. And I think for me, Arahmayani's work, just the fact that, I mean, a lot of people claim feminism and feminist art is such a big practice these days, and it's getting a lot of attention. But what is true feminism is the capacity to be able to go to a terrain that's completely unfamiliar and masculine, and single-handedly manage to whisper, you know, oh, you guys can come out of your, you know, sanctuaries, and you can be a monk, but you can also clean up the garbage. It's okay, you know? And I don't know how you can not call that art. Like, you have to have some kind of power inside of you to be able to envision that you can do that and then actually manifest it. I'm getting carried away just thinking about that. But yeah, just to note that we can not underestimate what sparks up and what is possible when we allow so much more. I mean, I see the growth in Jean Bin since 2014 in the way that he presented and in the way that he is exploring space and really letting himself fly, getting, I mean, he's still an incredible, you can call him an ink painter, but you can't call him an ink painter anymore, right? I mean, he's completely transcending that. And that's another example of freedom. And so this panel was modes of being. Modes of being redefined and ways of allowing ourselves to be more free, be able to do what we need to do and have life. Not life imaginary or aesthetically, but actual life. And working against the chaos of the outside world requires that we constantly change, start from space, start from the personal, and then really take it out to the world. So I had to sum this up because they didn't have a chance to talk, and we have to wrap up. So I hope that my monologue helped. Thank you. Do we have time? 4 minutes. Anybody has questions?
Go for it.
Yay! No, there's a mic coming.
Well, thank you very much to everyone. And it's kind of a brief question, but I don't even know if it's relevant because everyone feels so uplifted. I mean, when you say modes of being, I think perhaps Arakawa and Sam are basically like, when he talks about adab or being in a particular way, when Arikawa is suggesting the same thing through his architecture for other people to operate through, and perhaps the politeness in a way that Mr. Ranbir Kaleka just basically gives that away when you encounter him. You just have to strive to be a better person or act
He
better.
He is the epiphany of adab.
Yeah, just the politeness, which is one of the meanings of adab, I guess. It kind of suggests a way of being, as you said, rather than perhaps making an object, as was earlier pointed out. But my question is, excuse me, I just bring another example, like Saraceno, just suggesting a way of moving, perhaps by the way he's creating his sculpture and things like that. But how do you compare this sort of art making and living with, let's say, discussing an event? How, let's say, something that just basically talks about something that just happened or finds a paradox through that as a presentation or in a way of documenting something. How do you see that? Basically, I'm asking Craig in a way, where he sees this, because it seems like you're moderating this this session.
Well, I didn't want to bring anything top down because Leeza had actually already written a beautiful statement, which I thought sort of summarized actually what some of her driving ideas behind the panel was. But for me, this is the collection section, but to me, this is the practice panel. So, this is the panel where, we don't actually look at making objects that can happen, right? But it's really the practice that transforms the person. Art is transformative. There's alchemy involved. It changes the person. It can change communities. It can change the world. And adab is how that happens. So there's something that's unifying all of this together. Maybe we wouldn't describe this as art now, but it was the way we described art in the past. And so I'm not particularly wedded to the way we define art right now. I think it has its very dramatic limitations, categorical thinking and what have you. And so that's where I would say what's unified about this is none of this art lives without the practice, and the transformation is both the artist and the audience, and as a result, society.
Well, we did the practice in 2016. This really is, though, about collections. Yes, it's both practice and collections. It's all connected and related together. And I'm trying to bring collections away from object and say we're in constant mode of collecting. And that is the practice. Without the collection, from the very beginning, there is no insight. Adab comes from being able to churn the significance, quintessentialize what is the significance of something and bring that out. And without accumulating a process of understanding over time, you cannot do that. And each and every one of the artists, by the way, let's not divorce them from the art world. They're actually quite successful practitioners in the art world. They're recognized, they have practices. And so we are lucky in a way. We can't say that the art world doesn't have appreciation for this. I just think, or that there's no room for this. In fact, we are beginning to really, I think we are in a sort of a renaissance period if we allow ourselves to really, to take that beyond the market and beyond the personal ambitions of having to make a living and worrying about having recognition and all the things that boggles us down. I think what is significant about Rahmayani, because she says, oh, I don't know if I have a career. She has a kick-ass career, 35 years of performance around the world. You will be shocked to see what she's been able to do. But yet, she doesn't let that boggle her and allows herself to go and actually go beyond this arena that is so seductive, that is the art world, because we get so seduced by our own ideas and creativity and talking about it and creating language about it that we forget that we're here to actually impact and take all this creativity and actually empower everything else around us. This really is how much we really do have, and it's not that we're missing anything. It's like we have everything. It's just putting aside all the things that try to make us feel like we don't have the power and really, go out there. And I've heard Rahmayani sometimes feel disillusioned because she doesn't get the recognition and stuff. And my job as a curator is to make sure that she is appreciated and she knows that there is a class of community of people that actually really understand her. And on that note, we can continue the conversation because I'm getting really dirty looks from Mariam. Thank you so much, everybody. We can continue the discussion in the other. Oh, we have a reception. We have food and refreshments. They're probably non-alcoholic, but that's great. And we are going to the pop-up house, warehouse 46 and 47, which is just, a step away. So please come and visit over there and hang out and look at some art. Okay? Thank you so much.